I grew up here in Eagle Rock, California, single parent household, middle class, lower middle class a little bit, but we never went without. I had a loving mother. Never met my dad, so that was kind of a strange, but it didn't seem strange because when you come from a loving family, it doesn't really, that's just your life, you know? I never really talked about my dad. I asked questions in front of my mom because I thought it'd be kind of disrespectful. The only reason I know anything about that is because my son asked questions, but I've never really had that conversation with my mom at all. My impression of growing up without a dad is like my mom was pregnant and then they separated, but they did meet once when I was a baby, and I think to myself, and it was the only time I ever was moved to tears about that situation because he came one day and she was holding me, and he met me and he asked my mom to borrow some money or something like that, and that was the last time that he ever saw me, and I think I was like, dude, you saw your son and you still didn't stay. You would think that would make you want to stay, you know, like, oh, I have a son now, and he was so wrapped up in his life that you know, obviously my mom, I don't think she lent him the money, and then he just took off, and we never saw him again. And that's the only time I was like, wow, the guy did meet me, and he still chose to abandon his family, you know, so it's kind of strange. I joined the military in 1989, and then I went to boot camp in 1990, and then I met my wife in 1991. It was at a quinceañera. We were both very young, and I asked a lot of guys, like, hey, what's going on with this girl? You know, she's kind of cute, and her father was just like world famous in the valley for being very strict. So they're like, dude, forget about that girl. They're never gonna let her go out. And I'm like, that's the way I kind of, you know, when you're living that way, you're like, well, how do I date? And they're like, that's never gonna happen with this girl, so forget about her. And all the guys that try to, you know, they're kind of like, no. And I was like, well, let me see what happens there. And then at the quinceañera we danced, and we went on one date, and it was over. My wife was definitely in it to win it. She wasn't messing around. She was like, I definitely want to get married, and from the very start of the relationship, that was our mission was to get there. I was already in the Marines when we met, but I kept that part of my life distant from my wife because unfortunately when you meet people when you're in the military, a lot of people get drawn to that job where they feel they're dating a Marine. A lot of people feel like they're dating a law enforcement or a fireman. Certain jobs attract certain type of women. And I wanted to differentiate that when I got out of the military, my wife was gonna be like, no, I want to be married to a Marine. So I kept that part of it distant. When we met, it was 1991. And then I got orders to go to Hawaii. So you got to understand, that is a jackpot moment in anyone's life. You join the military, you get stationed in Hawaii, right? You win, right? But Hawaii is a 4-year duty station, and I was like, it's horrible, man. There's no way our relationship is gonna withstand 4 years of long distance dating, and even being stationed in Paradise, I'm like, I need to find a way to get back home, and there was a lot of variables that, you know, that needed to happen for that to happen, and they all played out, and I just ended up being stationed back in Camp Belton, and then we just picked up where we left off. The dating process went pretty well, and then obviously we kind of jumped the gun with some things, and we had to get married rather quickly. You could say that was Liz's first baby picture right there in that time frame, so Liz kind of figured that part out. To be honest with you, I really thought her dad was gonna not handle it well. You know, obviously, as a dad now, he has 4 daughters. So having his first daughter get married get pregnant, and how that transpired, I mean, I was like, the fear was mostly how her dad was gonna handle the situation. It wasn't me being a dad, because I really hadn't, you know, I really never, to be honest with you, I never really thought about it. I just thought, at this age, I'm gonna get married, we're gonna have kids, But the whole process of how I was gonna be as a dad, it never really entered my mind. When my daughter was born, the first thing I thought about was not like, I need to be a good dad. Is my first instinct was like, if anyone harms this child, I will, I always thought about fatherhood as a protector, as a provider, but not as a teacher. I gotta say the first time I ever felt that way was when I realized that like my son is never gonna have someone take my place. You know what I'm saying? Like my daughter is gonna get married and now you literally give your daughter away, My son is never gonna have that giving away part of it. Like I'm his dad, right? And when I realized that, it set a chain of events that just drastically changed the way I view life. Like, how can your son be part of this church or be a blessing to the church and you be a screw up? You know what I'm saying? I'm like, oh, I'm a dad, bro. Not only that, I gotta be a Christian dad. And then when I thought about it that way, that just drastically changed the way I view myself as a parent, as a dad. You know what? I've never ever talked about this ever in my life, but I'm gonna talk about it. Okay. Hector was a premature baby at 6 months. And I was kind of scared he wasn't gonna make it. So it was tough for me to go full blown like I have a son, because I was so scared. They're like, oof. The odds are there's a good chance he's not. I was trying to hold back, because if something did happen where he didn't make it, I was kind of prepping myself not to get too close. And unfortunately, that played out for a very long time in my life. Not being able to get, I wouldn't not looking at my son in that aspect of like, there was always like a barrier between me and my son. Unfortunately, by the time I got saved, we're only talking about a few years ago. We're talking about 5. So my son's already a grown man. So trying to get him to get to the point where he wants to be comfortable talking about certain things, it's a work in progress. And the reason I came to church wasn't because I wanted to get saved. Was I didn't want somebody else to be with my wife, and I was trying to get sober. So that's really where I wanted God at. I was a raging alcoholic, just a man just infested by sin. You name it, I had it. My wife kind of just, I always treated my wife as a backup plan, like she'll always be there, she'll never leave me, that type of deal. And finally you gotta move out. And I was just a mess. I was doing everything that, I was a very bad example of a human being, I put it like that. And my plan was to do enough good things so I could do bad things. That type of, if I'm gonna be honest with you, that's what I'm gonna do good to give me the reason to do bad. And that was the whole plan, and that worked for about 4 or 5 years. Okay, babe, I'll make it up to you, that type of deal. In and out of rehabs, and you're talking almost 10 years of that. 10 years of me being in church and still drinking and doing my thing and trying to serve 2 masters and whatnot, and finally my wife got fed up with it and said, I'm leaving you, bro. And when my wife filed for divorce, it was shortly after Liz got married, and she handed me the divorce papers, and I was kind of upset, but I was kind of happy for her at the same time. Like, finally, my wife is leaving this loser, because I could look upon her like, dude, at least she has enough time to find another man, like that type of deal. Then God put something in my mind. I don't recall if it's a dream or it's a vision, but I have a clear recollection of my son meeting my wife's new man, and him shaking his hand and be like, why couldn't you be like this guy? Like him being the perfect guy, right? And my son be like, I hate the fact that you're making me do this, like that type of deal. And from that day on, I never drank again. Right here up the street at Starbucks, I called the pastor, because every person inherently thinks they're a good person that just does do bad things, right? And that creates guilt. Guilt is very healthy. Guilt's a good thing. If I do something bad, I should feel guilty about it. But that day I got my first taste of shame. Shame is, I'm a bad person that's pretty good at faking that he's a good person. I'm a bad person that does bad things. And I realized that if I accepted that part of myself, the real train wreck was about to happen. And I got to give it to my pastor, because you got to realize, I don't know if you've ever worked with someone to get them saved, or have you ever worked with somebody for 10 years? Just imagine the frustration. I've been talking to this dude for 10 years. He's not getting it, right? And I called him, and we went to Starbucks, and we prayed. So I asked him one time, I was like, hey, how come you never kicked me out of the church? And what I was expecting him to say was like, I always believed in you, Hector, and I always had faith in you. And his response was like, your kids come to the church, bro. It's kind of hard for me to kick you out. I didn't know how to do it, you know? So he was being honest with you. How do you do that? How do you kick a dad out of a church with his kids still come to church? It's kind of a hard thing to do, because the kids might follow, right? And my kids were extremely saved. And so there was luckily I never did anything too drastic in the church to force them to, like, you need to leave. But I give him credit, because I gotta say, I don't think I'd be man enough to do it. Could you do it for 10 years? One of the things that I really guard now is my testimony. Like, I don't do these things because it's gonna ruin my testimony. And my kids and my wife's testimony it involves me, right? So my kids being faithful, I'm like, wow, they're the generation that is gonna change what it means to be a Reyes, or, you know what I'm saying? One of the things I didn't talk about earlier was like me never meeting my dad, right? I never met him. I ended up being him exactly. Both of us were in the military. Both of us were good earners. Both of us had problem with drugs and alcohol and women and all these things. I'm like, and I only know this because my son asked him, but it was strange to me, like, wow, almost like a genetic curse. That's the way things are going to work out. And when my son broke those things, one of the things that says in the Bible is that you can have the father's iniquities can still ruin the son. And when I put all that together, I'm like, man, my son could be doing all these things, great things, and I could ruin him by the way I act. And I was like, man, how do I get on board? And that was very important to me, as like, what does it mean to be, you know, especially from a man's point of view, what does it mean to be us? You know, and I wanted my kids to realize that they played a profound influence on me. You know, there's a lot of people in the church that look at their dads and like, man, how couldn't you have done it, man? And the good thing is, sometimes when I get choked up, it's not because I feel guilty, or I'm happy, or I'm sad, is I'm amazed. When I see a lot of the guys break down, their tears of amazement. That God can, and He will. There's part of me that wishes, like, dude, you're kind of like a wuss because you cry sometimes, but I never want to lose that. The fact that God's greatness just moves you. That it's not just a book, you know, it's not just this thing that happened 2,000 years ago is something that if you do what he says, it's gonna happen now. That me never meeting my dad ended up being just like, and that God intervened, and now things are different.